Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, is Hamas at a crossroads?
Even without naming somebody, the movement continues. It's a movement for freedom, for liberation, for an end to Israel's military rule.
With two of Hamas's leaders killed by Israel, what's next for Gaza and its leadership? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
My name is Buttu, and I'm a lawyer who is based in Haifa.
Deanna, welcome back to The Take. It's always good to have you on. As Israel continues its relentless attacks against northern Gaza, recent statements from Western leaders seem to be focused on this elusive peace and not on the people of Gaza. They don't acknowledge that. Days after Hamas's leader, Yahya Sinwar, was killed in combat with Israeli forces, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that his killing presents a chance for a new phase in ceasefire negotiations. U.S. President Joe Biden saying something similar. On Friday, he called the killing a moment of justice and said it could be an opportunity to seek a path to peace. Deanna, do you see this as an avenue to peace?
Israel didn't need to kill Yahya Sinwar in order to stop its assault on Gaza. Israel doesn't need to seek permission from anybody to end genocide. Genocide is illegal, and it should have been stopped long ago. But the problem, of course, is that because the world isn't willing to do anything to stop Netanyahu, they're instead looking for these things such as illegal assassinations to somehow say that this is the opportunity for peace. It's not clear to me how it is that you can have peace when Israel is insisting on committing genocide. It's continuing its genocide. It's continuing its ethnic cleansing policy. And it's continuing its assault on the West Bank as well. And so my fear, of course, is that the world doesn't care about Palestinians, and they don't have any leverage any longer over Israel, or at least they don't want to have any leverage any longer over Israel. And so in the end, it's Palestinians who end up paying the price for all of this.
Well, I want to get your take on something that's still reverberating days later, and that is this Israeli army drone footage that they released of Yahya Sinwar's last moments. He's badly hurt in a house hit by an Israeli tank shell. His face is covered in a keffiyeh, and we see him hurl an object, most likely a stick, toward the drone in those final moments. The Israeli military had been looking for him for months. And the way he was killed didn't come from that search. It didn't come from intelligence. So how do you interpret his final moments and how it happened?
You know, the Israelis will never understand what it means to die a hero. They'll never understand what it means for Palestinians to see somebody with their very last breath. And remember, this was his non-dominant hand. His dominant hand was blown off. To pick up what last remains in his possession and hurl it at an Israeli drone. They will never understand the conviction, the strength, the desire to want to resist that military rule, that desire to resist so that we can be free. They'll never understand just what his killing, what his assassination means. But beyond that, you know, I think it's really important to talk about the question that you've asked, which is about this military intelligence. Israel has now been spending the past few days trying to spin its accidental assassination of Sinwar by claiming that somehow they had all of this intelligence and that they'd gathered intelligence. And yet it couldn't be further from the truth. This is a man who they claimed was hiding in tunnels. He wasn't. They claimed that he was hiding in hospitals. He wasn't. And so you either buy into the belief that they had this great intelligence, in which case, if they did, then why is it that they smashed Gaza to absolute pieces? Or you recognize that what their aim was from the beginning to smash Gaza into absolute pieces, and that they never had the so-called intelligence that they claimed that they had.
I think there are many online that would agree with you because I saw tweets and posts and social media saying that this was a strategic mistake, that Israel didn't realize what it was doing by posting this video because it shows exactly what you're saying, this fierce resistance even in the last moments. And I wonder what your take on that is.
I think that they released the video because they don't view Palestinians in any way other than through their own lens. Look, when you think about the way that Israelis talk about Hamas, they talk about Hamas as though somehow it's, a simple political party. And when you get rid of the head of a political party, the theory is that the political party dies. This was very much the case inside Israel. For example, one of the former Israeli prime ministers, a war criminal actually, named Ariel Sharon, he split off from the Likud party and formed his own party called Kadima. Today, there is no Kadima. You can't find anybody who's a member of Kadima because it died when he died. Similarly, the current member of opposition, a man named Yair Lapid, his father, many, many, many years ago, established a political party called Shinui. And when Teddy Lapid died, Yair Lapid's father, so did the political party Shinui. And again, you don't hear any of Shinui or Kadima or any of these political parties today. The difference between that and Hamas is that Hamas is actually a political movement, meaning that if somebody is killed, and of course they get killed, they don't just die, then the movement continues to live on because these are movements to resist Israeli military rule. These are movements for something. They're not just simply political parties. So Israel will never understand this. And that's why they thought that by publicizing the video, that it would show just how strong they are. And it would show the end of Hamas. Quite the opposite. It actually showed that Sinwar was unlike any of their leaders. He was a person who had actually gone out to the field. He wasn't somebody who, like them, was sitting in a nice air-conditioned room and sending other people's children to go get killed and to do killing. And the other thing is that they will never understand that this has also given some life and showed that he was a person who didn't just espouse these ideals, but actually believed them and implemented them himself.
More with Deanna after the break. So Deanna, you mentioned that this is not just a political party, it's a movement. And so we know now with the killing of both Yahya Sinwar and previously Ismail Haniyeh, there, at least in the public eye, seems to be a vacuum, a lack of leadership. The group hasn't yet announced who's going to be the new face. Where do you see Hamas headed?
At this point, I don't know if they will announce who the new person is. And the reason that they won't announce it is because it just becomes yet another target for Israel. What's important to remember is that political assassinations are illegal. And yet Israel has not only normalized them, but the language that's been used by many of these world leaders is to somehow make it legal.
Israel has a right to defend itself, and the threat Hamas poses to Israel must be eliminated. Today, there is clear progress toward that goal. Hamas is decimated, and its leadership is eliminated.
For example, when I look at Canada, the Canadian Prime Minister used the term elimination. That's a term that the Israelis use when they're referring to these political assassinations.
Do we have a sense of what Hamas's popularity is like among Palestinians? Because I know opinion polls are not a thing that are happening right now, but we did know numbers before October 7th. What do we know now?
It's hard to say. And it's hard to say for a couple of reasons. One is, you're right, we just don't know when it comes to Gaza what the opinion polls are because of genocide. But also in the West Bank, the numbers are the opposite. People in the West Bank are, by and large, supporting Hamas. And they're supporting Hamas as a political movement. And the reason that they're supporting it is because when they contrast between Hamas and between Fatah, they at least feel that Hamas is doing something. For Fatah, this has been a president that has been in office for, it will be 20 years in January. And over those 20 years, he's done practically nothing. He hasn't represented Palestinians well. He hasn't protected Palestinians. He hasn't even created an alternative to Oslo. He doesn't really have a vision. And so people contrast that with Hamas. And when it comes to Hamas, they say that they at least have a political vision. And so they look to that as being somewhat, they're supportive of that. In the Gaza Strip, before October of 2023, it was the opposite, that people were looking more towards Fatah than they were to Hamas. But all of this it's important to keep in mind one major thing. If you're under the age of 36 right now, you've never voted in a Palestinian election.
Wow.
So for practically 20 years, we haven't had elections. And that's the vast majority of the population. It's about 65% of the Palestinian population hasn't had a say in who their leadership is. And it's because of this that I think it's so important for the emphasis to be on Palestinians choosing their own leaders and be the one who's deciding, rather than, as we've seen the emphasis be so far, Israel being the party who decides, or the United States who's going to decide, or any other countries out there that is going to decide. It must be for Palestinians to decide. That's the essence of self-determination.
Well, and speaking of Israel being the party that decides, from the very beginning of Israel's war in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed repeatedly to defeat Hamas, that being one of the core aims of this operation. The White House National Security spokesman, John Kirby, said just on Friday that the group's capabilities have been weakened.
Eliminated any immediate threat that Hamas would pose from a military perspective. They've knocked out the military command structure. They've gone after weapons caches. They've made it much more difficult for Hamas to operate and act, plan, and execute the way they did on October 7th. So Hamas is in a much, much, much weakened position than it ever was before.
Yet, the war in Gaza hasn't stopped. So you touched on this earlier, and I'm hoping you can expand a bit, because we've seen leaked reports about Israel's true aims and what Israeli officials, government officials themselves have said out loud about their true aims. What does it tell you about Israel's true aims when it comes to Gaza?
The Americans have been saying for months now that Hamas's capabilities in Gaza have been diminished. And the Israelis know full well that they can't ever get rid of Hamas. The reason that Netanyahu put that as one of the goals is because he knows that the moment that Israel's attack on Gaza ends is the moment that his political career is over. Israelis, by and large, blame him for October the 7th. He's a very unpopular prime minister. And so the reason that he continues to push for the elimination of Hamas is because the continuation of the genocide is tied to his political future. And the problem, of course, is that as much as the U.S. may have intelligence or know exactly what's happening on the ground, they're simply not willing to push Netanyahu to actually end the genocide. They keep hinting, they're sending messages to the Israeli public, but they're simply not willing to stop that flow of weapons, which is actually fueling this genocide. Israel's aims in Gaza are clear. They were clear from the first week. They made it the Ministry of, one of their Ministry of Intelligence, I believe it is called, put out a document close to the end of October. And they said that what they aim to do is make Gaza smaller in size and fewer in population. They've already made clear that they intend to build settlements in the north and perhaps in the center. We're now seeing a general's plan that's being implemented in which they're calling for the complete ethnic cleansing of the north, with that ethnic cleansing taking shape through death, through destruction, and through starvation. And this is what we're seeing on the ground. The fact that we continue to see that the U.S. speaks out of both sides of its mouth, or that's being mealy-mouthed in this process, just shows you just how weak or how unwilling it is that the U.S. is to actually stop Israel. And it makes me believe, and others, of course, believe that this is not just an Israeli attack on Palestinians, but it's an American-backed Israeli genocide.
Mm-hmm. Well, finally, we're having this political discussion because that is where a lot of this lies, in what Israel's determinations are vis-a-vis Hamas, what the U.S.'s determinations are vis-a-vis Israel. But I want to talk about the Palestinian people because, as we started this conversation, as we speak, they're being pummeled in the north of Gaza. What do we know about what Palestinians want when it comes to Hamas, when it comes to the day after, that elusive day after?
You know, it's so hard. It's so hard for me to speak about this idea of the day after when I don't even know what tomorrow is going to look like. It's so hard to speak about it because what we should be talking about is ending genocide. And only then, after we pick up the pieces and we examine what Israel has done, can we actually talk about the day after. You know, we've seen just this past week, not only assassinations, but people burned alive in field hospitals. We've seen the destruction of the entire northern part of the Gaza Strip. We've seen the starvation of 400,000 Palestinians in the north. That's the number that we know of. There's probably many, many more. There is no safe place in Gaza. And when I think about how long it's going to take just to clear the rubble, 15 years by one estimate, 18 by another, this idea of what is Gaza going to look like afterwards, I want people to be thinking beyond that. I want Palestinian refugees to finally be able to return home. You know, the people who lived in Gaza weren't originally from Gaza. They were from those very communities that are surrounding Gaza, that Israel took over, the ones that people claim are so-called left-wing kibbutzes. They're not left-wing, they're on somebody else's land. I want to see Palestinians go home. And for me, peace looks like the day when I and so many others can simply go home. That's all we want to do, is go home. And it's not far to imagine. It's not difficult to imagine. But our political imagination has to go beyond just rebuilding buildings, and instead has to look broader, place Palestinians first, Palestinian needs first, Palestinian rights first, and then take it from there. And for me, that looks like going home.
What do you think is next for Gaza and its leadership? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like conversations like this, give this episode a thumbs up. And remember to subscribe to the Al Jazeera English channel here on YouTube.